"I thought I didn't need a man," the Apache woman said to the cowboy who rescued her. And then, the sun rose slowly over the dry lands of the southwest, spreading soft orange light across the desert. The wind moved gently through the tall grass, and the mountains stood quiet in the distance. In a small Apache camp near the edge of a wide valley, a woman named Naeli was already awake. She always woke before the others. While the sky was still gray, she would step outside her shelter and look across the land. To her, the desert was not empty. It was alive. She knew every path between the rocks, every water source hidden behind dry bushes, and every sign the animals left in the sand. Naeli had learned to watch carefully. Life had taught her that. She was not old, but her eyes carried more years than her face showed. There was strength in the way she stood and quiet confidence in the way she moved. She did not rush. She did not hesitate. Every step she took had purpose. Years ago, her life had been different. She had once laughed easily. She had once shared stories by the fire with her husband. She had once believed that tomorrow would always look like today. But life changed quickly. First, sickness came through the camp one cold season. Her husband grew weak and never recovered. Not long after that, trouble between different groups in the region made travel dangerous. Her father, who had always guided her with calm wisdom, did not return from one of those journeys. In less than a year, Naeli lost the two people who had protected her heart. Grief tried to break her, but she did not let it. Instead of depending on others, she chose a different path. She told herself that needing someone only made pain stronger when they were gone. If she relied only on herself, she would never feel that kind of loss again. From that day forward, she trained harder than ever. She practiced riding until her legs felt like stone. She learned to track animals with sharp focus. She repaired her own tools and prepared her own food. If something needed to be done, she did it without asking for help. People in the camp noticed. Some admired her determination. Others whispered that she was too proud. A few tried to offer assistance, but she politely refused each time. "I can manage," she would say calmly, and she could. She could ride long distances alone. She could travel to nearby settlements to trade woven blankets and handmade goods for flour, sugar, and tools. She could return before nightfall without fear. The desert did not frighten her. She understood its silence. Still, the world around her was changing. New fences had begun to appear across land that once felt endless. Small wooden houses stood where open space had been. Cattle moved across grazing fields under the watch of cowboys who spoke a different language and followed different customs. Naeli did not hate them, but she did not trust them either. To her, they represented change she had not chosen. When she traveled near their ranches, she kept her distance. She rode with her back straight and her eyes forward, showing no sign of weakness. She did not want pity. She did not want attention. One afternoon, as she prepared her horse for a journey through a narrow canyon, an older woman from the camp approached her. "You ride alone again?" the woman asked gently. "Yes," Naeli replied, tightening the saddle strap. "The path has been uncertain lately. I will be careful." The older woman studied her for a moment. "Strength is good," she said quietly, "but even the strongest tree grows among others." Naeli paused but did not respond. She mounted her horse smoothly and guided it toward the canyon trail. The path ahead curved between tall rock walls. The air inside the canyon always felt cooler. Echoes carried easily there, so even small sounds seemed larger than they were. As she rode, Naeli's thoughts wandered. She remembered her husband's laugh. She remembered her father's steady voice. For a brief second, her heart felt heavy. She quickly pushed the feeling away. Memories were like shadows, she believed. If you stood still too long, they surrounded you. It was better to keep moving. Her horse stepped carefully over loose stones. Birds lifted into the air as she passed. Everything seemed calm, yet beneath her calm expression there was something she would never admit aloud. Loneliness, not the kind that made her cry at night. She had already faced those tears long ago. This was quieter. It was the silence after finishing a long day and having no one to share it with. It was the absence of another voice by the fire. It was the feeling of carrying every burden alone. But she told herself that loneliness was easier than loss. As the canyon narrowed, Naeli slowed her horse. She always trusted her instincts, and something in the air felt different. The wind had shifted. The usual sounds seemed distant. She listened carefully. Nothing. Still, her hand rested near her rifle. She reminded herself why she traveled alone. When others depended on you, you worried about them. When you depended on others, you risked disappointment. Alone, the only life in your hands was your own. That belief had protected her for years. It had built walls around her heart, strong and high. Yet walls, even strong ones, can also keep warmth out. Far above the canyon rim, the sky stretched wide and blue. Somewhere beyond those rocks, cowboys were guiding cattle across the land. Settlers were building homes. Children were growing up in a world that looked different from the one Nayeli had known as a girl. Change did not ask permission. As her horse continued forward, a small stone rolled down from the canyon wall. Nayeli looked up sharply. Her eyes scanned the cliffs. For a moment she saw nothing. Then her horse shifted nervously beneath her. The calm she had trusted all morning began to feel fragile. But even then, sitting tall in the saddle, Nayeli did not think of asking for help. She did not think of turning back. She did not imagine that before the sun set, her belief in standing completely alone would be tested. All she knew was this: she had survived everything life had placed in her path so far, and she believed she would survive whatever came next. Because in her heart she carried one powerful thought: she did not need a man, she did not need anyone. Or at least, that is what she told herself as the quiet canyon held its breath around her. The canyon grew quieter the deeper Nayeli rode into it. The tall rock walls rose on both sides like silent guards. Sunlight touched only the upper edges, while the path below remained cool and shadowed. Her horse moved carefully over the uneven ground, its hooves pressing into the sand with soft sounds that echoed lightly. Nayeli could feel that something was not right. She had traveled this path many times before. She knew how the wind usually moved through the canyon. She knew where small animals liked to hide. Today, the air felt heavy, as if the land itself was watching. Her horse suddenly lifted its head and let out a nervous breath. "Easy," she whispered, gently tightening the reins. She looked around slowly. Her eyes scanned every corner, every rock ledge, every narrow bend in the path. She trusted her instincts more than anything. And right now, her instincts were speaking loudly. Then she heard it. The sound was faint but clear, a small stone sliding down the rock wall. She turned sharply toward the sound. For a moment she saw nothing, just rough stone and shadows. But then, from the corner of her eye, she noticed movement high above. Her heart began to beat faster. Before she could react, a loud crack split the air. The sound echoed violently between the canyon walls. Her horse reared up in fear, almost throwing her off balance. Nayeli held on tightly, steadying the animal with strong hands. Dust fell from the rocks above. Another sharp sound followed. Now she understood. She was not alone. Figures appeared along the canyon rim, men on horseback, blocking the narrow exit ahead. They were not soldiers. Their clothes were rough, their movements careless. These were desperate men who lived outside the law, moving from place to place, taking what they wanted. Nayeli's mind worked quickly. She turned her horse to find another way out, but more riders appeared behind her. The path was closed. Her breathing remained steady, but her thoughts raced. She had faced danger before. She had survived sickness, loss, and hardship. But this situation was different. She was alone in a narrow canyon with strangers who did not look friendly. One of the men called out something she could not fully understand, but his tone was clear. He wanted her supplies, her horse, anything of value. Nayeli did not answer. Slowly, she reached for her rifle. Her hands did not shake. If she had to defend herself, she would. The men began riding down into the canyon, surrounding her carefully. They moved with confidence, believing they had already won. Nayeli guided her horse backward toward the canyon wall, giving herself protection on one side. Her eyes locked onto the closest rider. She lifted her rifle. A moment of silence filled the space between them. Then she pulled the trigger. The weapon clicked, but nothing happened. Her heart dropped. She quickly checked the chamber. Dust from the canyon must have blocked it earlier. The rifle had failed her at the worst possible moment. The men noticed her hesitation. They rode closer. Nayeli made a fast decision. She lowered the broken rifle and urged her horse forward, aiming for a small gap between two riders. Her horse leaped into motion, sand flying behind it. For a second it looked like she might break through, but one rider moved quickly, cutting her off. Another reached toward her reins. Her horse panicked again, twisting sharply. Nayeli lost her balance and fell hard against the rocky ground. Pain shot through her ankle as she landed. Dust filled her mouth, and the world spun for a moment. She forced herself to stand quickly, ignoring the sharp ache in her leg. The men dismounted now, thinking she was defeated. They approached slowly, confident and careless. Nayeli backed up, picking up a fallen branch from the ground. She held it firmly, ready to defend herself however she could. She would not give up easily. One man stepped forward, reaching toward her pack. Before he could touch it, a new sound echoed through the canyon. It was different from before, stronger, sharper. A gunshot rang from high above. Everyone froze. The men turned their heads toward the canyon ridge. Another shot followed, hitting the ground close to their feet and sending sand into the air. A voice called out from above, calm but commanding. The riders looked up and saw a lone cowboy on horseback at the top of the canyon wall. His hat cast a shadow over his face, but his posture was steady and confident. He had been riding along the upper trail, tracking stolen cattle, when he noticed the unusual movement below. From his position, he had seen everything. The cowboy fired another warning shot into the air. The echo rolled through the canyon like thunder. The men exchanged uneasy looks. They had not expected anyone else to appear. The cowboy spoke again, his voice clear. He told them to leave. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then one of the riders muttered something and climbed back onto his horse. One by one, the others followed. They clearly did not want trouble from above where they were exposed. Within seconds, the men retreated down the far end of the canyon, disappearing as quickly as they had come. Silence returned. Dust slowly settled back onto the ground. Naomi stood still, her chest rising and falling as she caught her breath. She hated what had just happened. Not because she had faced danger, she could accept that, but because someone had stepped in to help her. The cowboy guided his horse down a safer path into the canyon. He approached carefully, not too close. "Are you hurt?" he asked. His voice was steady, not proud, not mocking. Naomi did not answer right away. She tried to put weight on her ankle, but pain shot through it. She forced herself to stand straight anyway. "I'm fine," she said firmly. The cowboy looked at the broken rifle on the ground and then at the direction the men had gone. "They might circle back," he said calmly. "This canyon isn't safe right now." "I can handle myself," she replied quickly. He studied her for a moment. He had seen her fight. He had seen her stand her ground even when outnumbered. "I can see that," he said. There was no disrespect in his tone, only honesty. Naomi bent to pick up her rifle. As she did, a wave of dizziness passed through her. The pain in her ankle was stronger than she wanted to admit. The cowboy dismounted slowly and kept a respectful distance. "Let me at least help you check your leg," he offered. She looked up at him with sharp eyes. "I don't need a man," she said clearly. The words were strong, almost proud. The cowboy paused. "Maybe not," he answered quietly. "But sometimes trouble doesn't care what we need." Naomi said nothing. Inside her, frustration burned. She was angry at the broken rifle, angry at the canyon, angry that she had been caught in a position where someone else had stepped in. But deep down beneath the anger, there was something else. Relief. She did not want to feel it. She did not want to admit that if the cowboy had not appeared, the outcome might have been worse. The canyon walls stood tall around them, silent witnesses to everything that had happened. The cowboy waited patiently. The sun had begun to lower in the sky, casting longer shadows across the sand. Naomi tried once more to step forward on her injured ankle. This time she could not hide the pain. The journey home was long. And for the first time in many years, she was standing at a crossroads she had never planned for. Alone, as she always preferred, or accept help just this once. The decision weighed heavier than the injury itself. The canyon felt different now. The danger had passed, but the air still carried tension. The sun was moving lower and long shadows stretched across the ground. Naomi stood beside her horse, trying not to show how much her ankle hurt. The pain was sharp, but her pride was sharper. The cowboy waited a few steps away. He did not move closer without permission. His horse stood calmly behind him, as if it understood that this moment required patience. For a while, neither of them spoke. Naomi finally broke the silence. "You can go," she said, her voice steady. "I will manage." The cowboy looked around at the narrow canyon walls and then back at her swollen ankle. "It's a long ride back," he replied, "and the light is fading. I've traveled in the dark before. I'm sure you have." There was no challenge in his tone, only simple truth. Naomi tried to mount her horse. She placed her foot in the stirrup and pushed upward, but pain shot through her leg, forcing her back down. She caught herself before falling, pretending it had only been a small mistake. The cowboy saw everything, but he did not comment. Instead, he walked to his saddlebag and pulled out a small cloth. He poured a little water onto it and held it out toward her. "At least cool it," he said gently. "Swelling will only get worse." Naomi hesitated. Accepting the cloth felt like admitting weakness. But her ankle was throbbing, and she knew she could not ride far like this. Slowly, without looking at him, she took the cloth. Their fingers brushed for just a second. It was a simple touch, nothing more. Yet it felt strange to her, not because it was improper, but because it reminded her how long it had been since she had allowed anyone close. She crouched down and wrapped the damp cloth around her ankle. The coolness eased the pain slightly. The cowboy stepped back again, giving her space. "My name is Thomas," he said after a moment. She did not answer right away. "Nay, Ellie," she finally replied. He nodded once. "You ride alone often?" "Yes." "Even through this canyon?" "Yes." He studied the rocky walls. "Brave." "I don't call it brave, I call it necessary." Thomas leaned lightly against a nearby rock, careful to keep his movements calm. "Those men have been causing trouble along the trade routes," he said. "I've been tracking some stolen cattle, didn't expect to find them here." Naomi tightened the cloth around her ankle. "I didn't expect them either." For the first time, there was a hint of frustration in her voice. Thomas noticed. "You fought well," he said. "Most would have frozen." "I don't freeze." "I can see that." The way he said it was not mocking. It carried respect. Naomi slowly stood again, testing her weight. The pain was still there, but she could manage if she rode carefully. Thomas walked to her horse and adjusted the saddle strap, checking that it was secure. "You don't have to ride alone tonight," he said quietly. She lifted her chin. "I always ride alone, even when you don't have to?" His question lingered in the air. Naomi looked away toward the canyon entrance. The sky was turning soft gold. If she delayed much longer, darkness would make the path more dangerous. She hated that he had a point. "I didn't need a man," she said firmly, almost as if reminding herself. Thomas did not argue. He simply replied, "Maybe not, but sometimes we need timing." She frowned slightly. "What does that mean?" "It means I happen to be riding above that canyon at the right moment. That's not about you needing me. That's just the way the world moves." His words were simple, but they caught her off guard. He wasn't trying to claim credit. He wasn't trying to act important. He was speaking plainly. Naomi mounted her horse again, slower this time. With effort, she managed to sit upright in the saddle. She kept her face calm, even though her ankle protested. Thomas mounted his own horse. "I'll ride behind you," he said. "If you change your mind, I'll be there. If not, I'll turn back once you're clear of the canyon." She did not respond, but she did not tell him to leave either. They began moving through the canyon at a careful pace. The sound of two horses echoed softly off the walls. For a while, the only noise was the steady rhythm of hooves against sand. Naomi felt his presence behind her. It felt unfamiliar. For years, she had ridden with only her own thoughts for company. She had grown used to silence. Now another heartbeat seemed to follow her. She didn't know whether she liked it. After some distance, her horse stumbled slightly on a loose rock. She tightened the reins quickly, steadying the animal. The movement sent another wave of pain through her ankle. Thomas rode closer, but not too close. "You don't have to prove anything," he said calmly. She glanced back at him. "I'm not proving anything." "Then why look like you're fighting the wind?" She almost smiled at that, but stopped herself. They continued forward until they reached a wider part of the canyon where the walls lowered slightly. The open sky above felt like a small relief. Thomas spoke again. "I lost someone once," he said quietly. Naomi stiffened slightly. She did not expect him to share something personal. "My younger brother," he continued. "We used to ride together. After he was gone, I figured it was easier not to get close to anyone." Naomi kept her eyes forward. "But after a while," he added, "I realized that riding alone doesn't stop the pain, it just makes the trail longer." His words settled into her thoughts. She did not want to relate to him, yet she understood exactly what he meant. Loss had taught her to build walls. She believed those walls made her stronger. But today, those same walls had almost trapped her in that canyon. As they reached the end of the narrow path, the open desert stretched before them. The sky was now painted in orange and pink. Naomi slowed her horse. Thomas stopped beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "This is where our trails split," he said gently. She nodded. For a moment, neither moved. Then she looked at him directly for the first time since the attack. "I would have survived," she said. "I believe you," he replied without hesitation. She searched his face, looking for doubt. There was none. "And I didn't need a man," she added again. Thomas gave a small nod. "Maybe not." There was a pause. "But I'm glad I was there," he said quietly. The honesty in his voice made something shift inside her. Not weakness, not dependence, something else. Understanding. She had always believed that accepting help meant giving up strength, but today she had fought hard, she had stood her ground. And someone had simply stepped in when timing allowed. It did not erase her courage. It did not take away her independence. It only changed the ending of the day. The wind moved gently across the open land. Nayeli adjusted her reins. "Thank you," she said at last, the words soft but clear. Thomas tipped his hat slightly. "Safe ride home, Nayeli." She turned her horse toward her camp. As she rode away, she felt the pain in her ankle, but she also felt something unfamiliar in her chest. For the first time in years, the thought of not riding alone did not feel like weakness. It felt like possibility. The desert air grew cooler as the sun slowly disappeared behind the mountains. The sky turned deep orange, then purple. Nayeli rode carefully across the open land, her ankle still aching with every movement. She had told Thomas she would manage, and she meant it. But the truth was clear: the journey home would be slow. She had only gone a short distance when she heard another set of hooves behind her. She did not need to turn around to know who it was. Thomas had not left. For a brief moment, irritation rose inside her. She had already said she could handle herself. Why was he still there? She stopped her horse and looked back at him. "I thought our trails split," she said calmly. "They do," he replied. "But your camp is still a long ride from here. The men from the canyon may decide to circle around. I'd rather not take that chance." "I told you I can manage." "I know," he said again, "and I believe you." There was no challenge in his voice, only steady concern. The sky darkened further and a soft wind moved across the land. Nayeli realized that arguing would only waste time. The desert at night could be unpredictable, and she knew those men might still be nearby. Without another word, she turned her horse forward again. Thomas rode beside her now instead of behind, not too close, not too far. They moved in silence for a while. The sound of crickets began to rise from the grass. In the distance, coyotes called to one another. Nayeli tried to focus on the path ahead, but she could feel his presence beside her. It felt strange, not uncomfortable, but unfamiliar. She had spent years walking her own road. Even during trade trips to nearby settlements, she kept conversations short. She never allowed anyone to travel with her for long. Now here she was, riding beside a man she had met only hours ago. After some time, her ankle throbbed harder. She shifted in the saddle, trying to hide the pain. Thomas noticed. "There's a small water spot ahead," he said. "We can rest there for a few minutes." "I don't need to rest. Your horse might." She almost argued again, but she knew he was right. Her horse had worked hard that day. They reached a small clearing where a shallow stream flowed quietly between stones. The moon had risen, casting silver light over the water. Thomas dismounted first and tied his horse to a low branch. Nayeli followed more slowly, careful when placing her injured foot on the ground. This time, she did not pretend the pain wasn't there. Thomas knelt by the stream and filled his canteen. He brought it over and handed it to her without speaking. She took it. "Thank you," she said softly. They sat on opposite sides of a small campfire Thomas built quickly with dry twigs. The flames flickered gently, pushing back the darkness. For a long time, neither spoke. The quiet was not heavy like before. It felt calmer now. Thomas finally broke the silence. "You've been riding alone for a long time, haven't you?" "Yes." "Why?" She looked into the fire, the flames reflected in her dark eyes. "Because when you depend on someone," she said slowly, "you give them the power to hurt you." Thomas listened carefully. "I lost my husband," she continued, "and my father both in the same year. After that, I decided it was better to carry my own weight." The fire crackled softly. Thomas nodded. "I understand that." "Do you?" she asked, her voice not angry but curious. "I lost my brother," he said quietly. "He was my closest friend. After he was gone, I tried to close myself off too. I thought if I didn't let anyone close, I wouldn't feel that kind of pain again." She looked at him now. "And did it work?" she asked. He gave a small, thoughtful smile. "No, the pain stayed anyway. The only difference was that I was alone with it." His answer surprised her. The moonlight made the desert look almost peaceful. The world felt far away from fences and disagreements, far from the noise of change. Nayeli stared at the fire for a long moment. "I learned to be strong," she said. "I learned to fix things myself, to ride alone, to protect what is mine." "That's not wrong," Thomas replied. "But today," she continued quietly, "if you had not been there," she stopped herself. Thomas did not finish the sentence for her. Instead, he said gently, "Being strong doesn't mean you must refuse every hand offered." She thought about that. For years, she had believed that accepting help meant giving up independence, but today she had fought bravely. She had stood her ground, and when the moment turned against her, someone had stepped in not to control her, not to take credit, but simply to stand beside her. The fire burned lower. Thomas stood and walked toward her carefully. "May I look at your ankle?" he asked. This time she did not refuse. She extended her legs slightly. He worked quietly, examining the swelling. His movements were careful and respectful. He wrapped a clean strip of cloth around her ankle, tightening it just enough to give support. "You should stay off it tomorrow," he said. She almost laughed at that. "There is always work. There will still be work after one day of rest." His voice carried calm confidence. When he finished, he stepped back again, giving her space. They sat together for a while longer, watching the stars appear across the sky. The desert felt wide and endless, but somehow less lonely. Finally, Nayeli spoke. "I said earlier that I didn't need a man." Thomas nodded. "I remember." She took a slow breath. "I still don't need one to survive," she said carefully. "I can ride, I can trade, I can protect myself." "I never doubted that." "But," she paused, he waited. "But maybe I was wrong about something else." The wind moved gently around them. "I thought standing alone was the only way to stay strong," she continued. "I thought if I didn't allow anyone beside me, I could not be hurt again." Thomas listened closely. "And now?" he asked. She looked out at the moonlit desert. "Now I think strength might also mean choosing when not to stand alone." The words felt new in her mouth, but they felt true. Thomas did not smile proudly. He simply nodded. The fire burned down to glowing embers. They stood and prepared to ride again. This time, when they mounted their horses, Nayeli did not feel irritated by his presence. They rode through the quiet night side by side. The journey still had miles to go. But something inside her had already traveled much further. By the time the first light of morning touched the desert, Nayeli and Thomas were already riding again. The sky slowly turned from dark blue to soft pink. A new day had begun, quiet and calm, as if nothing had happened in the canyon the day before. Nayeli's camp was not far now. Her ankles still hurt, but the cloth Thomas had wrapped around it gave her support. She had barely slept, yet her mind felt clearer than it had in years. They rode mostly in silence, but it was no longer an uncomfortable silence. It felt natural, like two travelers sharing the same road for a while. When the outline of her camp finally appeared in the distance, Nayeli slowed her horse. Small shelters stood near a cluster of trees. Thin smoke rose from early morning fires. People were beginning their daily work. Thomas stopped beside her. "I'll wait here," he said quietly. "No need to cause questions." She understood what he meant. Tension between different groups in the region was real. A cowboy riding directly into her camp could raise concern. She nodded, but before moving forward, she looked at him. "You kept your word," she said. "I said I would see you clear of the canyon. And beyond it." He gave a small shrug. "Seemed right." For a moment, she simply studied his face. In the early morning light, he looked less like a stranger and more like a man who had chosen kindness without expecting reward. "I will tell them what happened," she said. "Not to create anger, only truth." "That's all anyone can ask," he replied. She hesitated. Then something unexpected happened. She extended her hand. It was not a gesture of weakness. It was not dependence. It was respect. Thomas looked surprised for a second, then he reached forward and shook her hand firmly. "Thank you," she said again, this time without hesitation. "Ride strong, Nayeli." She turned her horse and rode toward the camp. As she approached, several people noticed her limp. Two young boys ran forward to take her horse's reins. An older woman hurried toward her with worry in her eyes. "What happened?" the woman asked. "There was trouble in the canyon," Nayeli replied calmly as she dismounted slowly. "Are you hurt badly? It will heal." The older woman helped her sit near the main fire. Others gathered, listening closely as Nayeli explained what had happened. She described the riders who blocked her path. She explained how her rifle had failed, and she told them about the cowboy who had appeared at the right moment. Some faces showed concern. Others showed surprise. "A cowboy?" one man repeated carefully. "Yes," Nayeli answered. "And he helped you?" "He did." There was a short silence. Nayeli looked around at her people, the same people she had kept some distance from for years. They had always respected her strength, but she had never fully allowed herself to lean on them. "I fought," she continued firmly. "I stood my ground, but the timing was not in my favor." He stepped in, not to control, not to take credit, only to help. The older woman studied her closely. "And what do you think of that?" she asked gently. Naomi paused. She had spent so long building walls that speaking honestly felt like stepping into open space. "I think," she said slowly, "that strength does not disappear when someone stands beside you." The group remained quiet, absorbing her words. Later that day, as she rested her ankle, Naomi sat outside her shelter and watched the camp move through its daily rhythm. Children laughed as they carried water. Men prepared tools for work. Women shared food and conversation. For the first time in many years, she noticed something she had overlooked before. No one here truly stood alone. Even the strongest hunters relied on others to prepare meals. Even the wisest elders leaned on younger hands for support when walking. Strength and connection were not enemies. They were partners. By afternoon, a small group of riders approached from the open land. Naomi recognized Thomas among them. He had returned, but this time he had not come alone. 2 other cowboys rode beside him, and they stopped at a respectful distance from the camp. Naomi stood slowly, her ankles still tender, and walked forward. Her people watched carefully. Thomas removed his hat. "We came to speak," he said clearly. "The men from the canyon have been causing trouble for everyone, ranchers and travelers alike. We believe they may try again." Naomi nodded. "They block trade paths," she replied. "They will return if they think we are divided." Thomas agreed. "That's why we thought it best to share information." The conversation that followed was cautious but calm. There were no raised voices, no threats, only facts. For the first time, Naomi stood between her people and the ranchers, not as a lone rider, but as someone willing to build a bridge. Over the next weeks, small changes began. Messages were shared when suspicious riders were seen. Trade routes were watched more carefully. If danger appeared, word traveled quickly between the camps and the ranches. The troublemakers soon realized that their chances were smaller when others worked together. Gradually, the threats faded. One evening, as the sun dipped low once again, Naomi rode out to the edge of the valley where Thomas waited. Her ankle had healed. She rode strong and steady. "You look better," he said with a small smile. "It healed," she replied. They stood side by side, watching the open land stretch before them. "I used to think needing no one was the only way to survive," she said quietly. "And now," she considered her answer carefully. "I still stand on my own," she said. "I still carry my own weight." Thomas nodded. "But I choose who rides beside me," she finished. The wind moved gently through the grass. Thomas looked at her with respect, not pride. "That sounds like real strength," he said. She glanced at him. "I thought I didn't need a man," she said softly, remembering her words in the canyon. "And you don't," he replied calmly. She smiled slightly. "But I don't have to stand alone either." They did not speak of promises. They did not speak of forever. The desert had taught them both that life could change quickly, but something steady had begun. Not dependence, not rescue, partnership. As the sky turned gold and the first stars appeared, Naomi felt something she had not allowed herself to feel in a long time: peace. Not because danger would never return, not because she had given up her independence, but because she had learned that strength grows stronger when shared. And from that day forward, when she rode across the open land, she no longer saw it as a path meant only for one rider. It was wide enough for 2.